A very good morning to everyone. On behalf of MergerWare, I take this opportunity to welcome our featured panelists and audience to this exclusive webinar on the extremely relevant topic, Best Practices for M&A Integration. It's a privilege to have Christina Ungaro, Russ Hartz, and Dharmendra Singh with us, who are experts in this field and shall be reflecting on the theme of this panel discussion. Let me begin by introducing Christina, who is currently the Vice President, Corporate Development at Wind River and is responsible for driving the business development agenda with a focus on M&A. She brings to Wind River nearly 20 years of proven experience helping companies transform and grow through acquisitions, investments, joint ventures, and partnerships, including experience acquiring both private and public market companies and cross-border M&A. She most recently led global corporate development at the JLL, the commercial real estate firm, and previously spent a decade at IBM in the corporate development organization, where she worked on numerous acquisitions across software, services, and hardware. It's an honor to have you, Christina. I welcome you to this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I would now like to introduce Russ, who is currently the Vice President, Corporate Development at Ansys, the worldwide leader in engineering simulation software, where he manages the entire global M&A activities. Russ is a deeply experienced corporate development professional with specific expertise in strategy development, M&A, investments, and post-merger integration. Prior to joining Ansys, Russ served in a similar role for 12 years on SAP's global corporate development team, negotiating and managing M&A and strategic investment transactions of all sizes, from multi-billion-dollar deals to small IP acquisitions. It's a privilege to have you, Russ. I welcome you to this webinar.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We also have Dharmendra Singh with us today, who is the founder and CEO of MergerWare. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Vansa.
I'm Akanksha Joshi, and I will be your moderator for today. I would also like to mention that the audience can send their questions to me through the Zoom chat link. The questions will be taken at the end of the session. So let's begin the day. So Christina, if you don't mind, let's begin with you and then Russ. So I'll move on to you and we'll work through that as we move on to other set of questions. So Christina, what are the key elements of any deal success? Moreover, which M&A stage, as per you, is the most critical that defines success?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it starts with early on clear executive sponsorship and a very well articulated strategic rationale for an acquisition. That's very important to have that vision up front as to how the acquisition is going to bring value to the company, to your shareholders, and we start thinking about integration very early at that stage. Strong cultural fit, alignment on core values, also very important. I think having a due diligence process that's honest and objective, which can be easier said than done, but is vitally important as well. And then a clear integration plan with accountability and a governance model around it that will ensure success. I think it's also important to define what success looks like for that acquisition. It's going to be a little bit different from deal to deal. It might be revenue, it might be profit, it might be product milestones or retention metrics, but understanding how you're going to measure value post-closing is important to articulate that early in the process as well. So in terms of the most critical stage, I think they're all very critical in the sense that every stage builds on the prior stage and overlaps, but clearly moving into the integration stage is where things, I think is where success either happens or doesn't happen. So perhaps that's the most critical from that perspective.
Russ, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I'll echo much of what Christina said. The deal rationale is critically important. It must be well aligned with your overall corporate strategy. I get the question a lot, what is your M&A strategy? There isn't a separate M&A strategy, separate and detached from corporate strategy. M&A is a tool to accomplish corporate objectives. It's not a exercise unto itself. So your deal rationale must be very well aligned with corporate strategy. A thorough diligence process that is not just focused on identifying material risks, legal risks, that's important, but you also need to be confirming as part of your diligence, is the deal rationale sound? Is the company what you think it is from a business perspective? Does it help you achieve your objectives and advance the deal rationale? A thoughtful, well-aligned integration plan. Well-aligned meaning, with all of the stakeholders across your company, they need to be actively part of the integration planning. And that starts well in advance of closing the deal. And then you refine that plan as quickly as possible after closing, as you learn more details about the target company and their employees, their business, their culture. And then I'd say a well-managed, disciplined integration process that has buy-in from the most senior levels. As I think that's where Christina started, which is you need that support and that buy-in right from the top level. I agree that all of the phases are important. I would say the planning phase, so typically before you even get engaged with a particular target, and certainly when you're engaged in the diligence process, when you're planning your integration, when you're planning what the company's going to look like post-deal, that's where it all starts, and that can't be overlooked. You can't get too focused on just getting the deal done and not pay a lot of attention to the planning. So.
Thank you. So Russ, I'll move on to you for the next question. So in the M&A process, when should the integration planning begin?
Yeah, I mean, I was dancing around this in the answer to the last discussion. Integration planning has to start very early on in the due diligence phase. We get our integration leads involved in due diligence so that they're familiar with the company and the risks and the diligence findings and the business very early on, and are able to factor that into the integration plan, which, as I said, needs to start during that early pre-closing phase. And so, this means including your integration leads in the diligence meetings with the target, get them introduced in person, if possible, to some of the target management team, so both parties can put faces with names, and begin to establish the relationships that are going to be really important to the integration process post-deal.
Yeah, I would agree with Russ. I mean, integration planning should start early and should happen often. It's I'm thinking about as the individual who's sourcing and spearheading those early discussions with targets. I'm thinking about integration from the very first conversation with the target in terms of assessing the strategic fit, the cultural fit, the operational fit. Those all have implicitly integration considerations around them, and even some granular things such as asking a target what systems they're on and what do their employee benefits look like and things like that. And all of those questions lead to assumptions in your valuation model. So integration has a cost associated with it. Integrating an employee base has a cost associated with it, and that all impacts value. So we have to start identifying some of those things very, very early on before we even structure the transaction, so that the structure is responsive to how we're going to integrate. So I can't stress enough how important it is to think about integration from the very first meeting.
So Dharmendra, would you like to add on?
Sure. So as Christina said that, integration should start at the beginning of the deal. As soon as you go and identify a target, you should start thinking how you are going to integrate. Now, the biggest challenge what we have, most of the time deal is closed and there is no integration manager identified. So nobody knows who is going to do. So he is always involved very late in the deal process. So as soon as deal is closed, he should be involved pre-deal process, due diligence process. Otherwise, he don't know exactly what is the deal objective, right? He had to drive the whole integration, and he is not involved. And that is one of the big challenges which I see in most of the team, that integration manager is not identified very early in the deal. And I think this is one of the best practice to identify an integration manager when you are between signing and closing at least, so that as soon as deal is closed, you are doing the proper handover and you hand over to integration manager. So I think very early in the game, if integration manager is involved, the deal, the closing and the success of the integration is much better.
Thank you. So coming to the next question. Christina, what are some best practices for ensuring a successful handoff from due diligence to integration?
So I think it helps to have some commonality between the due diligence team and the integration team. And that can be very easy to do in a small company where that is many of the same people are working on the whole deal from start to finish and through integration. But for larger companies where you might have more of a dedicated full-time integration team, it's important to get that team engaged in the due diligence process as early as possible, and make sure they have visibility into the due diligence findings, that they're on the weekly calls, they're getting access to the data room, and that they understand what issues are surfacing. And as part of that process, I think it helps to, one practice I've gotten in the habit of over the course of my career is always asking functional teams to categorize the issues that they're finding through the diligence process as a pre-closing issue, or is this a post-closing issue? Is this an integration item? And if it is an integration item, how are we going to mitigate or resolve that post-closing? Who's going to own that issue? Who's going to drive the resolution, and putting accountability around that? So it's important to not just come up with all these due diligence findings, but really categorize them and get some organization around it and figure out how you're going to resolve these things. I think having one system too, if you're using a project management tool, one system to manage due diligence through integration also facilitates that handoff. Everybody can have access to the same work streams, documentation, issues and resolutions. That certainly helps, I think, facilitate better collaboration. And then the last thing I'll just say is, never, piece of advice, never kick the can down the road. I think there are always issues that come up in the deal process that don't seem that important. We can figure it out later. Inevitably, we have to figure them out eventually, and sometimes they turn into bigger issues. So I think as things surface through the pre-closing phase, make a concerted effort to try to come up with a mitigation plan, even if it's something that seems small, because it could spiral into something much bigger down the road.
Russ, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, again, echoing a lot of what Christina said. I mean, first of all, we talked about involving the integration lead early on, and that's key. That means the transition starts happening before the deals even close. When you do that, I think one of the organizational structures to enable that to happen is to have your IMO under the corporate development team, or as part of the corporate development team. I've seen where it is detached from corporate development. You run the risk that they're not top of mind, the IMO is not top of mind, and not getting involved at the outset. So here at Ansys, IMO is part of my team, part of the corporate development team. And just as Christina said, I'm thinking about integration in the very first discussions with a potential target before you even have a term sheet on the table, and including the members of my team that are part of the IMO in terms of at least knowing, what's in our pipeline so they can start doing their own research. I do think that's important. That eases the transition later. I also agree with, to the extent you can structure your deal teams with people. So these are other members of your organization across, all of the major functions in your organization that would get involved in due diligence. If those people could also be the folks that would stay with the acquisition and handle integration matters for their function post-deal. I do think that's a best practice. It's not always possible, as Christina said. A lot of that depends on the size of your own organization, but I do think that is critically important, because again, there really isn't a transition in that when you've got that setup. It's the same people throughout. Where you don't have that type of setup, it is helpful to involve the people that only get involved at the integration phase or are only responsible for doing the work at the integration phase, getting them involved in the due diligence phase, even if they're more passive and they're just, learning about the company, maybe just have access to a data site, getting that information to them early on helps with the transition. And then we have, one or more transition calls from that involve the due diligence team and the integration team, to the extent that we've got new people getting on board in the integration. We've got calls as we're moving out of the diligence phase towards the closing, but before the closing, to do knowledge transfer with that team, to make sure everybody's aware of the key diligence findings, the sensitive issues, maybe cultural issues at the target company, who the key people are, what the integration priorities are. We do a similar thing, as Christina said, when we're in due diligence, we bucket things that we find as either deal issues or integration issues. To the extent we've got our list of integration issues, we make sure that the integration teams, as they're getting ramped up, are fully aware of what those issues are and the relative timing for addressing those.
Would you like to add on?
Yeah, so I think Christina and us have covered most of the point, but I'd like to surely add that this is very important, the handover process, like identify early risk, the transaction team, whatever risk they have identified, if it is not transferred to integration team and not really understood, it creates lots of problems. So I think most of the points Russ and Christina brought, I think they are very critical for the integration manager to have all this before he takes the charge of running the integration, having his team, because he also needs some time to, most of the time I have seen that integration manager is there, but still he don't have different team leaders. So if he don't carry all this handover process, if he's not aware about the deal, what had happened, the critical finding, he'll not be able to really build his team and drive overall integration process. So this is very critical. And I think now I think most of the company wherever I work, I see there are a lot of drive to really make this process very smooth, and transfer should be done completely before it is handed over to integration manager and business team.
Thank you. So come to the next question for you, Russ. What are the benefits and limitations of integration playbooks and checklists?
Yeah, the primary and obvious benefit of these types of tools is that it keeps you from reinventing the wheel on each new deal. And assuming that you're keeping them updated, which you absolutely should be, it allows you to document and incorporate new learnings from your actual experience into your process. And so they are absolutely critically important to your overall integration practice. The primary limitation of these tools comes down to the old M&A adage that every deal is different. And so your playbooks and your checklists, they're not going to cover or adequately address every single issue or circumstance for each and every deal. So you need to revisit your tools each deal, consider what modifications should be made. You may need to add items to your list to cover new and unique things that you find about a particular target or a particular deal. You may need to modify existing items to fit the situation. And importantly, sometimes you need to remove a lot of items from the list. And for some reason, this seems to be the hardest thing for teams to do. They get so locked into playbooks and checklists that they want to shoehorn everything on their list into a particular deal or for a particular target, when many times, the things that you've got in your templates just don't apply in a given situation. The other thing I'll say is because there is likely some significant variability in your integration approach, depending on what type of deal, for example, a smaller tuck-in deal versus a more transformational, larger deal, you need to indicate in your playbooks and your checklists, what items apply to what type of deal. And perhaps you might even want to think about having separate playbooks and separate checklists that apply to each different type of deal.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Russ said. I think just to add maybe a few points to that, on the benefit side, clearly having a checklist, is very helpful for new team members as well. It's a way to sort of institutionalize best practices around integration as teams fluctuate, new people come in. There's always a group of folks who have never worked on an acquisition before that are working on the acquisition. So that can be a really helpful set of guideposts for those individuals. I think as a corporate development professional, understanding the checklists and what goes into some of these functional work streams is important as well, so that we're not promising things during the negotiation phase that the integration team can't reasonably deliver on. So it's a good way to help keep us up to speed on all the things that have to happen post-closing and making sure we structure a deal in a way that's harmonious with that to the extent possible. And then, lastly, I think it helps you sort of get the table stakes down so that you can focus on the higher value, more customized considerations for every deal. As Russ said, there is no one size fits all checklist. So, but if you can get the table stakes, sort of figured out pretty early on through your playbook, then you can focus on that stuff. And I think a good checklist is also not just a list of tasks that have to happen by each function, but a good checklist will probe questions that need to be answered on every deal. For example, what is the brand strategy? It's going to be different maybe on every transaction, but a good checklist will probe all the questions that need to be addressed. What's the brand strategy? Are you going to keep the brand, toss the brand, for how long, why? So it will probe and make sure that those questions get answered. And then, so I think, certainly a lot of value to having playbooks, checklists, but there are always going to be lots of unique considerations on every deal as well.
Thank you. So coming to the next question for Christina. Christina, what do you think about setting up IMO, and why is it so critical for integration? Also, when the IMO team gets involved, how long do they stay as a part of integration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big supporter of IMOs. We call them PMOs as well. Others might call them something else, but I think having a central office or team on top of the integration is vitally important for anything that's larger than a small acqui-hire. And it could be a fairly robust organization for a very large transaction. I've seen most IMOs stay in place for 6 to 12 months for kind of an average mid-market deal. I think for a larger transaction, it could be 2 or 3 years or even longer in some cases. And then I've also seen situations where the IMO is maybe specifically tailored to a transaction. And in some organizations that have a little bit more regular M&A volume, the IMO really becomes more of a center of excellence around integration, and is not just in place for the duration of a deal, but is in place permanently and is really providing best practices for integration across all deals. The IMO might also get involved in measuring post-closing acquisition performance on some sort of a cadence, monthly, quarterly, for some period of time. And so that's another role that team can play. But I think it's vitally important to have that accountability, that leadership, that central point of contact to ensure that the acquisition integration is proceeding smoothly, but also so that the acquired employees have a central place to go if they need help with something or something requires troubleshooting.
Russ, would you like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you are a serial acquirer or even a fairly regular acquirer, it's important to have an IMO. Integrations are a full-time job, at least for the first 3, 6, 12 months post deal, depending on the nature of the transaction and the size of the acquired company. And if you stack up 2 or more integrations, now you've got a full-time job all the time. And so you need dedicated people to manage that. As Christina alluded to, the IMO function enables you to create consistent, repeatable approach and processes to your integrations that are based on, actual experience and lessons learned and best practices. The IMO should accumulate and record the lessons learned over time as part of their normal function based on their experience and incorporate, what they found into the playbooks and the checklists and the processes. And by definition, the IMO is made up of professionals in integration, in M&A integration. And so as with any professional in any other discipline, IMO team members will make it part of their continuous learning charter to seek out best practices from experts and peers in the field. So, over time, they're continuing to optimize, your organization's practices because you've got professionals managing that integration function. Another important point that Christina made with respect to your templates, you've always got new people in your organization getting involved in a given integration project. Your IMO can play the role of training up those folks as they get involved around integrations, how they're managed, what are things to look out for, and the like. I agree with Christina generally in terms of the amount of time the IMO stays involved. It obviously does depend on the deal size, but typically it's a 6 to 12 month period. I'd say it needs to be, as long as there remains significant tasks and to-do items outstanding that span across different functions in your organization, particularly where those tasks require, some cross-functional work and have some cross-functional dependencies, because the IMO is that center function that will make sure that the teams continue to work collaboratively with each other and that deadlines and commitments are met.
Would you like to add on to it?
Yeah, so I think as Krishna and Russ said their points, so if you look at IMO, it's a very critical function especially for large deal decision must. The biggest benefit of having IMO is making sure that every team is working right, making sure that integration manager have good support, reporting is happening on time, your checklist, process, training, everything, even your best practices, recording of this session, these are available to the team. And they keep driving at least for a year. And I think the best practices before they hand over to business and go, at least a year in a larger deal. That is the time frame they should really target. And they are very, very supportive to integration management office. And since these guys are experts, they also make sure that you don't have to really chase people to get information. They concentrate all the information and present to the committee. So they'll be driving, and they are external to integration team. So that way they are not people who are influenced, right? So that is another benefit we have. For 1 year, they are driving things, making sure that till integration phase, it completes a year. Then they hand over to the business, and then they go out. So this is a very critical function, and I think most of large integration, these are very critical team for the success of the team.
Thank you. Russ, I'll be starting with you for my next question. Do you have a dedicated integration leader at your company? And is this a critical role to ensure integration success?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. And my dedicated integration leader happens to be on this webinar. And we've got a small team. So in our corporate development function at Ansys, And so all members of the corp dev team get involved in leading certain aspects of an integration, in some cases, leading the overall integration itself. But when it comes to the larger integration projects, the more significant ones, my integration leader, a person that has been involved in integrations for well over a decade now, is absolutely key to our whole integration practice at Ansys. She's the person who, as I said, leads all the important integrations. She's responsible for drafting and updating our playbooks, our checklists. She's a true professional in this area. And I think too many times, companies just think, any project manager or any person with project management skills can lead an integration. I completely disagree. This is it's a function that does require a lot of expertise. And as we all know, M&A is extremely unique. The change management aspect of M&A integration is extremely important. If you haven't been around that for years, you don't really have a sense of that. You don't have sensitivity to a lot of the issues that come up in an M&A integration project, as opposed to any other type of project management exercise. So having someone who's been around the block, who's seen a lot, who understands their way around acquisitions, what needs to get accomplished, that is vitally important to the success of your integration.
Yeah, I agree with Russ, and I've worked in organizations that have dedicated integration leaders, as well as broad dedicated integration teams underneath that leader. I've also worked in organizations that don't have any dedicated integration leader. But even in those cases, and in my current company, we're a smaller company. We don't have enough, frankly, M&A volume or integrations for someone to have that as a full-time job. But that doesn't mean we don't have someone who's overseeing integration. So it might be in a smaller company, an individual who is also working on special projects, operational items, project management, as Russ said. But it's important to have someone who's done the integrations before, who's worked on acquisitions over and over, and has that experience, and has been around the company for a little while, and is connected and understands where to go to get things done, how to troubleshoot issues quickly. Someone who can help the acquired employees make the necessary connections that they need to make to drive synergies. So in our case now, it's we have a wonderful individual who's been around a very long time, has worked on other transactions, but when we don't have an integration going on, there's a lot of other activity that this person is involved in as well. So, they wear multiple hats, and that's how you might have to do it in a smaller company, but no less important to have that accountability and oversight and central point of contact on the integration.
Dharmendra, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, so I think as Russ was saying, mostly integration manager person should be somebody who had full-time role, because in the case of Christina, maybe somebody who have been with the company for a long time, and he have been involved in several projects. So he is acting as an integration manager. But large deal, most of the time we pick the guy from business, who understand the business. He know the clear objective of what we need to drive. He know the deal objective, what he want to achieve, synergy, and he is one who is chosen always integration manager. So at least in my experience, some of the critical deals, I see that the guys are nominated by business. Those people who have been in company, but who know the business as well. They know that they have been involved with this business for quite some time. They know clearly that what is the synergy objective, how critical it is. And based on that, they also go and decide their team. Because once they know the objective of the deal, then they are going to also help them to decide what type of team they need, what type of support they need from management, what type of support they need from IMO. So this is very critical to have dedicated role. At least, the person who is taking this role is not easy like project manager job. Many times it's, people confuse that integration manager is kind of a project management. But as Christina, you said, it's not project management. It's a really dedicated job to drive it. Many times he don't own the teams, but he have to make things happen. And many times you might have seen that, people are part-time, coming from HR, finance, and other departments, and they all are working along with this integration manager, where he don't hold any resources, but still he need to deliver. So unless until he have good support, he understand business, for him it will be very difficult to drive it. So that's why having integration manager role is very, very important. Identifying the integration manager early is more important. So it's very full-time job.
Thank you. Christina, for my next question, I would like to ask that what tools, methods, or practices have you found to be the most impactful in ensuring successful integration?
I think we've talked about a lot of them so far. Having a good playbook that is continuously updated and a closed loop process between due diligence and integration is important. Good project management tools just to help create that documentation and audit trail. Weekly cadence calls. I think we all at the end of the day, no matter how many tools and playbooks we have, you just have to get together on a regular basis throughout the process and sort of hash things out day after day as you're working through due diligence and structuring and then into integration. So getting into a good cadence and not dropping that cadence when the deal closes either, but continuing on, at least for the first 6 to 12 months to ensure that things are moving smoothly. Having an integration leader, as we talked about, having something else that we've done when we onboard new employees. We assign individuals a buddy or a contact internally to help them navigate the organization. And we certainly carry that practice over to M&A as well. As acquired employees come in, everybody's assigned a point of contact or a buddy that can help them navigate the organization. So that's a good practice just to help onboard the acquired teams. And then the last thing I would say perhaps is just as more of a broader point is really giving to ensure success, giving the acquired team some ownership and accountability over their business. They built this business, they understand it top to bottom, and once it's integrated into the organization, I think it's important to depending on the construct and rationale for the deal, but it's important for them to have ownership over sales goals, maybe a P&L, the ability to continue to hire and manage their team as they see fit. And then creating incentives across the organization to drive collaboration and positive revenue synergies. But I think it's really important that the acquired team understands the value that they're bringing and have the ability to continue to run their business to some degree, I think, post-closing.
Russ, would you like to add on to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything Christina said. I'll add just a couple of points. One of the key success factors, I think, for us is in our integration model or setup itself, we have a model that we refer to as 2 in a box for each of the major functions and stakeholder groups that get involved in our integrations that manage and perform tasks across the integration. So think, sales, organization, product, HR, legal, finance. In each of those functions, we put a lead from our team, from our company, and a lead from the acquired team. And this has been extremely well received by acquired teams. And to Christina's point about getting them, invested in their own business, it gets them invested in the integration itself because they're tasked with actual work and with rolling up their sleeves to get that work done alongside brand new colleagues for their particular function. So being part of that integration team, getting connected to people in our organization also helps them form bonds within our company, as opposed to feeling like they're out on an island and we're just some big behemoth that they don't know anything about and have no connection to. Obviously, communication is key for the integration process, and Christina talked about the weekly cadences to make sure that everybody's aligned and on top of what's happening with the integration as things arise. There's always new things that come up along the way, despite best laid plans. And so making sure that everybody's well connected throughout the process and having the discipline to continue those meetings throughout the integration process is important. It's important for cross cross-functional, interdependent work that needs to happen. We've got people from finance and HR, for example, talking to each other on a regular cadence. That's critically important for the making sure that everybody's aware of pitfalls that may not be in their particular function but may affect their function. And then beyond on the communication point, but beyond just the regular integration meetings, it's also important to find other ways to communicate to the broader population at the acquired company as well as your own company about what's happening with the integration, the value that we're deriving from the acquisition. And so, town hall meetings, employee Q&A sessions, maybe a special integration newsletter, postings on company portal, just keeping folks up to speed from both companies. So, it's not just a press release and then things get lost and people are wondering what's happening. Constant communication about the deal, how it's being successful, what's going on in the integration process, I think is important.
That was really good information, Christina and Russ. Dharmendra, would you like to add on to it?
Yeah, so thanks, Krishna. Russ, I think you brought very good points. And I think there is not a single line where, it's not important for success of integration live on many points. So I will add one point which I experienced, which worked very well. So involving both the team. So when we are setting up integration team and when we are doing 100 days, I saw that people from acquired company, they were part of our team, and we were all sitting, at least all the stream leaders, they're all sitting in one room, and it was just face-to-face meeting. The goal was to do the integration planning for 100 days in one place, identifying all the dependencies, looking at what are the top risks. This was done in a closed room, and each member have been they were presenting their challenges, what they are doing, how they are doing, what are the lists of dependency between different streams, and that we identified at the beginning of 100 days. And that was one of the exercise which I saw it was very successful because the team was very involved from the beginning. And since initially there was lots of kind of a push-pull that can we involve people from the the acquired company or not. But as soon as they came on board, I think they were very free. They were also having more information. At the beginning of the deal, they don't have so much information while deal is being closed. But as soon as after day one, when we are doing the planning for 100 days, they were fully involved. And as Russ said about communication, so they were aware about all communication happening. They were communicating to their partners, their employees, and all this whole process worked very well because we have internal communication leader, external communication leader, and they were both from both acquired company as well. So that really helped them to build a very cohesive team, and they know that they are going to work for till at least 1 year to 2 years, till integration is fully complete. And this was one of the exercises where I was participant. It was very, very helpful because that really makes sure that both the teams are working from the day one, and they are aware of all the information what is happening, and they know exactly what they are going to do for the future. So I think that is one point which we'd like to highlight. This was very helpful, and that help us to really make sure that deal is happening right. Integration teams are fully involved.
Thank you, Dharmendra. Coming to you, Russ, for the next question. So how do you define success for an acquisition? Does it change from deal to deal?
Well, as a general matter, I believe that an acquisition is a success if it meets the financial targets, budget parameters, other metrics that you set out in your acquisition business case as part of the deal rationale. And if you're retaining key talent at the acquired company and keeping them happy, motivated, and productive. At the end of the day, and I think this applies, generally for every deal, if you get those things right, the deal's a success. Now, there is often, when it comes to integrations, there's often what I like to refer to as noise. And it comes from the folks that are in the trenches closest to the grunt work of the actual integration. There are always, things that come up that maybe you didn't fully understand as part of your diligence or weren't discovered in due diligence. And for that reason alone, it leaves the feeling that something was missed. And as a result, sometimes these issues get blown out of proportion. And again, it's typically, by people that are close to the details, maybe people that have a tendency to sweat the details. But if these things ultimately don't translate into lower revenue, for example, or materially higher expenses than you budgeted for, or low employee morale, or employee attrition, loss of key talent, then they are essentially what I refer to them as noise. And it's not to say you shouldn't deal with those issues. You need to deal with those issues. Maybe there's a systems issue, an IT systems issue that's causing the acquired team from getting on your systems, or it's taking longer than you planned for. And that's important, and that needs to be addressed and fixed. But I look at this from a deal success from a higher level. How does your executive team view it? How do the shareholders view it? And if you're delivering on the financial metrics that were set out for the acquisition, and you're retaining the key talent, I think the deal is a success, no matter what kind of noise comes out of the integration process.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I think financial indicators have been probably the most common metrics that we look at to historically across most acquisitions to find success. Could be revenue, could be EBITDA, could be both, could be more of a gross margin measure in some cases. I've worked on some transactions where there's a lot of noise created with internal allocations that just don't really give a true picture on contribution profit, but we work backwards to more of a gross margin measure. Maybe that's more appropriate. But I've also worked on transactions where the financial indicators are actually not that relevant. It might be a small technology tuck-in that's going to a puzzle piece that's going to fit into a much bigger puzzle. It's going to be really hard to figure out what value that small piece brought, but maybe we think it's going to accelerate our product roadmap by 6 months or 12 months, and we create some product milestones or roadmap milestones that will help define success. And then retention, of course, as well, particularly for talent-based transactions. I've worked on some transactions where the deal really is just about the talent, and there actually isn't any discrete revenue associated with that team, or an acqui-hire scenario, perhaps. And retention is everything in that type of a transaction. So I do think it can really vary from deal to deal. The important thing is just to understand from the outset what is the value that you're trying to get out of that transaction, and aligning your metrics and KPIs, with that value equation.
Dharmendra, would you like to add on to it?
Yeah, so I think it depends on your financial performance. If your dealer sponsor is happy, means you're doing better job. Your financials are going to be, meeting the target. Whatever business plan you have done while closing the deal, and based on that, you might have got got the fund to do the acquisition. So if you are able to meet those targets, I think the deal is successful. And as Russ said, that retaining the team, retaining the talent, I think this is not so not so easy. So once landing an organization comes, after that next 1 year, lots of movement for people, finding them another position within the company, really monitoring those positions to make sure that each person who have been identified, maybe some position could be redundant. So how to move these people? So I think those planning, if you do well, so that's why all the HR have lots of job to do during this entire exercise, identifying the key position, looking at the key talent, how you are going to reposition in other within the company or within the group, or maybe out of your group, and retaining them for a year at least, because they are the one who are going to drive the business. So if you are able to do these two things, the rest of things, whatever you do, nobody see, but the sponsor will be really be behind you to see how your deal is delivering after post acquisition. So these are the two critical things Both are very challenging because you identify synergy. I know you are not going to meet 100% whatever you have planned, but of course, by the time your deal is fully integrated, you'll have something to show up. But then your deal sponsor should be very happy. You know that, yeah, because if you are monitoring your post-acquisition performance, you are going to be monitored in how much deviation, how much really you have achieved. So two key point is financial measurement and your key people retention. So these are key and have to be managed till at least a year.
Thank you, Dharmendra. So I'll get to the last question here. Christina, we've all been involved in acquisitions that fell short of expectations. Can you share some key lessons learned from past deals and how you leverage those learnings for subsequent deals?
Sure. So I think in addition to all of the best practices we've been talking about here, which are important, they've all been born out of lessons learned, right? In addition to that, some more specific things, I think understanding early on when you're looking at a potential target, what has made that business successful and what constraints they're facing is really important to sort of dig into. And then you have to ask yourself, can we continue to support them with the things that have made them successful? And can we remove some of those constraints? And I've been involved in acquisitions, and this is common when large companies are acquiring smaller companies, where the small company has achieved tremendous revenue growth. They've been very aggressive in the market. They've priced very competitively. They don't have to worry about cash burn or EPS, and other things that large companies have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. And that's what's made them successful. Bring that into a large company now, and prices go up and revenue starts to slow down. And when you start to change some of the things that have made them successful pre-closing, that can really impact things post-closing. So I think really trying to get ahead of that and understand what ongoing resources and investment is going to be needed to continue the momentum of what you're buying is really important. I've also seen situations where synergies become financial exercise on paper, but don't ever really get translated into a real action plan. And I think every synergy, synergies just don't happen by themselves. Every synergy, whether it's a cost synergy or a revenue synergy, has to require a plan for enablement and accountability around it. So sales enablement, critically important, incentives, critically important to generate those revenue synergies. They're not just going to magically happen, by themselves when you bring two companies together. And then I think the last thing I'll say is in terms of integrating a target and setting them up for success, it's a common issue I've seen is the tendency to sort of overwhelm that team very early on with sales leads and all sorts of different activities that the acquired company wants to get them involved in very quickly. You want to start going after those revenue synergies as quickly as possible, but they have a day job, and they have a pipeline, and they have a lot of things that are keeping them busy already, 12 hours of the day. So it's important to find that right balance. And not overwhelm the acquired teams, too quickly, with the organization that you're putting on top of them, and stage things out and put a plan of enablement around them.
Russ, would you like to add on to it?
Yeah, sure. We have talked about a lot of best practices that if you don't follow, it leads to lack of success. I think, not defining the preliminary integration plan early on, well in advance of closing, that's completely in line with the strategic rationale for the deal and the business and financial objectives and what you found in due diligence is a mistake. I think then, you've got your plan, but being too rigid in applying your plan and the standard aspects of your plan that are born out of your playbooks and checklists is sometimes an issue as well. To Christina's point, you have to be sensitive to what it is that made the acquired team successful, what their secret sauce is. And sometimes you don't fully understand that coming out of the due diligence phase. Sometimes you learn about that, as you get into the integration. Some of it, some of the secret sauce is cultural in nature that you didn't really have a full appreciation for in the due diligence phase. You only have exposure to a certain number of people at a target company at that early phase. And so you learn more about the company and their culture as you get into the integration, and not remaining, flexible and agile in your integration approach as you learn more about the company is a mistake. And then, the last thing I'll add here is, lack of sustained commitment to the acquired business by the sponsoring business with your organization, perhaps lack of post-closing investment in the business, even if it's planned in your business case. Maybe you have a plan to hire, 5 more people post-deal to scale the acquired team sales organization. Well, if that investment never gets made, obviously that's going to have an impact on the business results. It leaves the acquired business feeling lost within the large organization. They feel underappreciated, they become less motivated. You get into the retention issues that we talked about as a key success factor. So, what's the way you avoid these? Or if they happen in a given deal, how do you correct them? You do quarterly business reviews on how your acquisitions are doing. You're looking at the metrics. You're staying close to softer issues around the organization. How are the employees feeling about it? Are we accomplishing the things that we've set out in our integration checklist and our integration plans? And where we're not, you identify the causes of the issue, the problems that you're experiencing, and then you course correct. You make a plan to address those issues as quickly as you possibly can. But those quarterly reviews are important, so you don't find yourself looking back a year later saying, wow, that first year post acquisition was a disaster, or we didn't meet our objectives. You need to be doing this on a regular routine basis so you can correct on the fly and correct quickly.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, I think a common mistake I've seen, especially with very large acquirers, is make an acquisition. The acquisition then starts to underperform a little bit. They miss a quarter or two. The common reaction to that within a large public company is, well, we have to cut costs. And, so immediately send in the finance team and start looking for ways to cut costs. You might cut R&D, you might cut other things that are very vital to the growth of that business. So that's a common reaction, but that can lead to a quick downward spiral in what you just acquired. And so, really taking the time to understand if something's off the rails, what's going on, and does the business need to pivot? Does the business need more investment in certain areas, and be willing to continue to support that business with the resources that it needs, which is not not always common practice within certain organizations.
Dharmendra, would you like to say something on it?
Yeah, so I think Christina and Russ have put most of the points. So I think something about the best practices, which I have seen that, while you are tracking revenue synergy and cost synergy, identifying those levers, identifying who is going to drive it. If you are cut the cost, then, really planning the cost, like which quarter you want to, how much you want to reduce, maybe real estates, or could be headcount you want to reduce. So how you are going to do, who are the people who are going to drive. So these are the key factors we have to do it, really making sure that revenue synergy leader and your cost synergy leader is identified. They are one who are driving it, making sure that wherever there is a real investment needed to make sure that business is scaled up, those investment you have to take it into account. Many companies have this challenge that after 1 year, they start reducing the cost. And then that becomes problem because whatever the plan they had to ramp up the sales team, to do the investment in R&D, they shortfall the real investment, what is needed to scale them. So I think these are the things which really company have to make sure that they do at the right time. They do really that, the cost, what is really needed for the business to grow, that have to be, business value have to be liquidated. The cost and even revenue synergy, whenever you are doing, you have to make sure that all your important components have to be taken care of. So they are very critical for, and in fact, there are lots of best practices around it. Company are doing different things, but I think each deals are different. And we have to make sure that depending on your deal, the type of deal, the value you want to acquire, you really plan it in such a way that you don't really, what is right, you do it. What is not really important and critical, that you can put it. So these are my couple of points, but I think Russ and Christina have covered many detailed points there.
Thank you. So these were some really great insights from all our panelists. Thank you very much for being on the panel, Christina, Russ, and Dharmendra. It was a pleasure to have you among us. I would also like to thank our audience for listening in and watching our webinar. The recorded version of this webinar will be shared with all the participants shortly. Thanks again for joining and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.